Hello. As writers, we all hate to repeat the obvious, but certain people at this conference really cannot be overthanked. Leah, Adam, Gwen, Travis, thank you for inviting me back to this place that feels like home, and thank you to the rest of the staff who welcomed me in as a newbie. Thank you, Jesus and Brittany, for your talent for reading with me. And thanks to all of you who have taken time to sit in community right now. There are a lot of readings, so thank you for coming to this one. Today I'm going to be sharing scenes from a play called Lemuria. At its core, this play is an inheritance drama, very loosely based on Shakespeare's King Lear. It's about matriarchy. It's about all the variations of grief. It's about the moment when someone at the top of their field realizes that their season of dominance is ending, and they have to choose a successor to carry on and perhaps surpass their legacy. The sort of kingdom of this play is a primatology lab in eastern North Carolina. It's a fictional version of the Duke Lemur Center. What you're about to hear is kind of an experiment with B-plot. I wanted to share these particular scenes, which are scene 2 and scene 9 in the play respectively, because the journey between these two characters, M, played by Brittany, and Sebastian, played by Jesus, really resonates with my experience at this conference. First, around mentorship, and second, because this play is about scientists, experts who are both deeply obsessed with and immersed in something, but also a little terrified that the rest of the world might not give a fuck about what they love so much. So buckle up, you're about to learn a lot about lemurs. Lemuria. Scene 2, September, an outdoor picnic table. M holds a clipboard. A bright-eyed teenager, Sebastian, looks around with wonder. He is the energy of a community theater star in a whimsical coming-of-age movie.
And just to wrap up our checklist here, can you confirm that you are tuberculosis negative?
Confirmed.
Vaccines?
All reboosted. Harm no lemur.
Huh?
Rule number 1 in the intern tour guide handbook.
Sebastian holds up his handbook proudly. It's tabbed, highlighted, and falling apart from careful study. The cover falls off. He beams.
And last but not least, have you ever been convicted of a felony?
No, I'm just taking a gap year while my dad starts his.
Listen, Sebastian.
I'm here for the lemurs. 100% a lemur believer.
Good, because I'm not even the regular intern coordinator, okay? Shafali's on leave for the rest of the year, and I've been advised to accumulate more youth mentoring experience.
Are you going to be my mentor?
Now we're ready to enter the final phase of your volunteer tour guide interview. First, I will ask you to recite the standard tour introduction from page 27 of your training handbook.
So everyone would gather around?
Then I will ask you a series of popular questions about our research and discovery teammates, the extraordinary primates who call Lemur Lab home. Christ, this copy. Okay, take it away, kid.
Red leather, yellow leather. So, if everyone would gather around, this is the 1045 tour, and I'm your volunteer tour guide, Sebastian. Hello! For the next 80 minutes, we'll be discovering biology in action here at the world-famous Lemur Lab. Founded 29 years ago by Dr. Annabelle Katz-Carver, we are North Carolina's and North America's largest research and preservation institute devoted exclusively to prosimians. What's up with prosimians, you ask? That's the exclusive tree-dwelling club to which lemurs belong, a smaller group within the order of primates. And with that, let's head over to the Bamboo Grove, where we'll meet our very first prosimian of the day.
That's extremely correct. Moving on to mock question 1.
Ready.
So, a lemur is a monkey, right?
Great question. Lemurs are close relatives of monkeys and of humans. We all share a common ancestor who lived millions of years ago.
No.
What?
Well, that was solid, but you need to start by just saying no.
Oh, definitely.
No, period. Lemurs are not monkeys, period. Period. Question 2. So how do I tell a girl lemur from a boy lemur?
Again, great question. So take a look at our troop of, I'm pretending that there are ring-tailed lemurs over here. Check out the males. There is Falstaff sunning himself on the ground, and in the prime spots, the females Goneril and Desdemona.
You memorized our lemurs' names?
I watched Lemur Camp. Ringtail Thursday with Dr. Miriam.
Proceed.
So you can see all these male and female lemurs. You can tell these male and female lemurs apart based on the social dominance and hierarchy. Does anyone know what the word hierarchy means?
Pretending that I'm an uncommonly smart sophomore. Hierarchy is a social system in which individuals have ranking based on various types of power and influence.
Excellent definition. So most species of lemurs are female dominant. What does that mean? It means that if the Lion King got rewritten by lemurs, it would be the lemur queen. It means that we are looking at a hierarchy in which one dominant female calls the shots, and the troop's other females battle it out below her. It means that lemurs, along with a few other female dominant animals like hyenas and orcas, are the Beyoncés of the animal kingdom. Or depending on how elder you are, the Arethas, the Dollies, both Patties. So who runs the lemur world? It is the girls.
In his heart, Sebastian throws his hands up in a perfect balance beam dismount. In his heart, the crowd goes wild.
A little extra with the musical references, but school groups and drunk moms are gonna love it. All right, question 3. Are lemurs native to North Carolina?
Do people really ask that?
Brace yourself.
So lemurs are endemic, which means native, to one place in the world. Does anybody know the name of that island nation? Africa is actually a continent, but the country of Madagascar is right off the eastern coast of Africa. Lemurs share their home, Madagascar, with nearly 26 million Malagasy people who call this extraordinary island home.
Why ain't there no people in that movie made at Madagascar? I watched them critters with my kid sister Dixie like 60 or 70 times, and I ain't never seen no Africans in that there animated film. Don't let your face react to the stupid.
Well, the movie Madagascar is iconic, but it also fails to acknowledge how the delicate balance between lemurs and their environment has been thrown off by rapid deforestation and mining across the island. Sorry to stop, but how political am I allowed to get?
Like on the general tour?
I know that Lemur Lab strives to be a welcoming space for all, but can I tell the visitors about the scars of French colonialism, like in a welcoming way?
That's a good idea.
Even though it's not in the...
Yeah, this handbook is ready for the trash. Literally, figuratively, mostly literally. Okay, well, I have an emergency meeting in 15 minutes, so you're in, kid.
Seriously?
Here's your lanyard or whatever.
This is an honor. Thank you, boss.
No, don't call me boss. Are we even paying you?
Is M short for Emily?
No, it's short for the letter M.
Got it.
Good. Now, let's go over the fig washing protocol.
A lemur cry. Time passes. In the gap between these scenes, M finds out that Sebastian, in his own word, is in the process of, his dad is in the process of becoming a leukemia survivor. And then they're in scene 9. November. Sebastian sits in front of a wall of PVC piping. The pipes are hung almost like a honeycomb, with deep tunnels running back from each opening. If we can see what Sebastian sees, maybe we notice a few dark bundles of fur deep within the pipes, breathing. This place feels holy, a lemur cathedral. M enters and sits next to Sebastian, who stares ahead with reverence.
Peaceful, aren't they?
Are they asleep?
Not today. Dwarf lemurs go into torpor for 7 months, and their bodies cool to about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Then, every once in a while, they warm themselves back up enough for their brains to shift into REM sleep.
How can you tell when they're warm?
You see those little collars? When they wake, they've used up all the stored fat in their tails. But they're totally back to normal in 10 minutes, scampering around like they didn't miss the whole winter. I get jealous of dwarf lemurs sometimes.
You like to sleep?
I was so depressed, I could barely wake up last year. So, kindred spirits.
I bet you have a really cool house with like a pool table.
It's a lightless basement apartment, but thank you for the vote of confidence.
Did you always know that you wanted to study lemurs?
I was a chem major. Thought intro to primatology would be a gut. Then Miriam was my TA.
Was she a good teacher?
Better than the professor by a long shot. When she's teaching, she has an uncanny ability to make you feel like she's only talking to you.
And you wanted to be a teacher like that?
I thought so. Then it started feeling like torture to hear myself speak or explain things. So now I work with furry, nonverbal gremlins. You're living with your Nana this year, right?
How did you know that?
She's your emergency contact. I got forms, shorty, remember?
I didn't think you read those.
Well, speaking of omniscience, we're upping your weekly tours. The Prime Friday slot.
Really? Really?
Do I kid? The moms are loving your energy. Besides, everyone on your tour is buying like 500 pairs of lemur socks on their way out of the gift shop.
We sell lemur socks?
Right? That's what I said.
It's not torture, learning from you. I mean, I know you're busy on Monday and Wednesday.
Very.
But maybe now that I'm here on Fridays, you could teach me how to log the caller readings?
Yeah, Fridays are pretty... I guess Fridays are a little less crazy. We should give these little critters their space.
Okay.
Em holds the door for Sebastian, who exits. Then to themselves.
Fuck. Maybe I should buy a pool table.
Thank you. And now, the most marvelous Pritha Bhattacharyya.
Hello? All right. Whoa. All right. Bonnie, that was amazing. Many thanks to Leah, Gwen, Adam, and Travis for having me back. So much admiration for my fellow staff members, and a shout out to the Girlfriend Experience, aka Sewanee bar staff. I'm going to read the second half of a short story called Model Organisms, and Bonnie and I did not plan having two science-y lab stories, but unfortunately hers is funnier. So what you need to know is that Samira is the protagonist. She's a recent Pakistani immigrant who followed her husband Aman to the US shortly after their arranged marriage. She works as a lab tech for a dog lab, but she is scared of dogs, and has established a friendship with lab manager Claude, who's an older transplant from Germany who was once a swimmer. And I'm gonna start midway through a scene where Samira's husband goes to cricket practice with his friends, and she's asked to cook a meal for them for when they return. Model organisms. Samira recalled when she'd first landed at the Baltimore airport on a Friday night, Aman waiting for her at the arrivals gate. Exhausted and jet-lagged, Samira could barely keep her eyes open as they took the highway into the Maryland suburbs and as Aman guided her through his modest one-bedroom apartment to the kitchen for a bachelor's idea of dinner, instant white rice and a dubious-looking pot of dal. Afterward, she dropped off into sleep, forgetting even to brush her teeth, and had woken the next morning disoriented with Aman nowhere to be found. He returned a few hours later, sweaty and panting, by which point she had showered and changed and was stirring a pot of loose-leaf black tea and milk on the stovetop. At the time, she'd believed his outing to be a singular occurrence, a consequence of living without a woman, which would quickly dissipate with her presence. But he had no intention of giving it up, just as he continued to bring his friends home after games with the unspoken expectation that Samira would have a meal prepared for the group, piping hot upon their arrival. Just as they both went to the laundromat on Sunday afternoons, but after bringing home their clean clothes, she took on the tasks of folding and ironing and putting away. But there were things she never would have done without his help. Her job, living in a new country with new rules and new expectations, while she thawed the ground chicken from the freezer, beat the eggs, poured out breadcrumbs in which to roll the spice patties she would make, she considered herself lucky that Aman was not a different kind of man. In the late afternoon, he returned with Hashim and Mahad. They lounged around the living room while she served them chai and biscuits and the plate of chicken croquettes. Samira retreated to the kitchen but eavesdropped on their talk as she pretended to busy herself. They spoke of the game and of politics and of who they knew was preparing to come to America and who they knew was struggling in America and who they knew who had experienced America and given up on it. The conversation turned to their wives. "I swear I would have waited to marry if I'd known there were girls who could cook this well," Mahad said. "How is she liking it here?" Hashim asked, which Samir took to mean her. A pause ensued before Aman responded. "Adjusting well, I believe. There haven't been any problems so far." "That's good, Yar," Hashim said. "When Yamina first came, she cried every day for a month, until I asked if it was better for me to send her back to Pakistan. I must have bullied her into silence. I never saw a single tear after that day." Mahad chuckled. "You know who to turn to if you want to learn to rule with an iron fist." Samira waited to hear her husband's response. She wanted him to disagree, to underscore that she didn't require such measures, that their marriage was not built on that kind of a give and take, but he said nothing. Though they usually stayed up in the evenings to watch reruns of 2.5 Men, Samira retired early that night. She made an attempt at sleep, but settled for staring at the yellow light flooding in from the crack of the bedroom door. After some time, Aman joined her. The bed creaked as he tried to find a comfortable position. He settled, his skin pressed lightly against Samira's back. The arm hairs tickled her side. "How do you know that I'm adjusting?" she asked into the darkness. He took a deep breath before saying, "I see it happening. I see you, don't I?" "Do you?" Samira wasn't sure if he was looking at her, but soon his finger traced along her face and a palm pressed against the lower edge of her rib cage and traveled down the line of her belly. He mounted her swiftly, and she knew what was to follow because it went the same way each time. It was though inside of her was a tangled string that could unravel and get taut if he could only just pull the end of it, but he could never find that end, and so he danced around her, searching and searching until he grew tired of doing so, and they inevitably pulled apart. She rose before him in the morning, observing the way his body folded in on itself without the regular effectiveness with which he operated in the conscious world. In the mirror, she covered herself back up, layer by layer, hiding all those things he couldn't find and which no one else was allowed to. Samir had only witnessed it a few times when a dog would be taken away, usually early in the morning, and not return. She'd once looked at the clipboard and seen a double asterisk by the name of the disappeared dog. She knew what it meant, and she felt restless on those days. Claude, usually equipped with a joke or inclined to tease her, was quieter too. "Can't they be adopted?" she asked him one day. A mutt named Toto, with white paws and a diamond-shaped splotch of brown on the back of its black torso, had been there one morning and gone the next. "Few people want the best from the shelters. Do you believe they'd go for a damaged one?" Claude asked. "They aren't killed in vain. The researchers do brain dissections and body scans, examine abnormal growths, investigate what the drugs have done. Do they always find something of interest?" When Claude next spoke, he did so deliberately, choosing his words with care. The research utilizes patterns and trends far more than any outliers. They use very small p-values on their trials, so the results are statistically significant more often than not. More often than not? Come, I'll show you. She followed him into an unfamiliar area, a microscopy room back where the researchers worked. In the pitch black, he shook a computer mouse to wake up one of the giant monitors. A grid of pictures appeared, cross-sections of brain. He clicked one to enlarge it, identifying the different areas, sites of high or low activity, and the trends they were discovering across sets of specimen. Samir imagined the future, could see those images one day getting neatly cropped and labeled, formatted into papers that would be sent out for publication, lives transformed into citation counts and impact factor and H indices, and then she was crying. It started silently, the tears dripping down her cheeks and disappearing into her neck, but soon enough her body trembled. "I've upset you. What's the matter?" There was a short click before the muted light of a desk lamp illuminated Claude's concerned face. She wanted to tell him it wasn't the dogs at all. She wanted to explain to him that she had a theory that there were different kinds of darkness, the stifling kind, the kind in which if you tried to talk, your voice was muffled, as though you were speaking on a long-distance call, and the listener had to keep asking you to repeat yourself. And even then they didn't pick up on the way you said it, whether you were satisfied or distressed or upset. And then another kind, in which the darkness was a conduit, in which everything could feel so clear and right that you didn't have to say a word. She took a deep breath and steadied herself. "I'm just tired." Claude sighed, nodding as though he understood. "It comes with the territory." At the end of the day, hours after Samira had reassured Claude she was perfectly fine to finish her shift, after she'd cleaned and autoclaved all the glassware, after she'd swept the lab floor, she stopped in front of his desk. She knelt and pressed her nose to the lab coat hanging on the back of his swivel chair. She found the photograph he'd once shown her, faded with wear. She would return it early the next morning before he could notice it had gone missing, but in that moment she put it in her purse. She returned home, placing it in the sleeve of her pillowcase. She changed her clothes, washed herself, conducted her prayers, cooked that evening's meal, set the table, chatted and laughed as Aman told her about his day, about the insignificant troubles with his boss and the idiocy of one of his lab mates. When he took her that night, she worried briefly about the photograph falling out from her pillow, of its glossy texture sticking to her skin, of the sweat from their bodies bonding to its surface. Aman pawed at her breasts, which failed to respond to his touch. Samir thought of the Indus River, forging through the Himalayas, the waves lapping along the shorelines, which she'd seen long ago when she was a young girl. She imagined how it would feel to be taken by a current, and concluded that the only enjoyable part of such an experience would be in that split second between being in control and losing it. Then she decided to forget about all that, to think about what she'd been wanting to think about from the start, and when she did that, the knot inside of her unraveled. After Samir had held her job for 11 months, Aman told her he'd been offered a better position at a lab in Boston. The lab was run by a more prestigious, more well-renowned PI. The pay was good enough she wouldn't need to work. They couldn't afford to live in the city proper, but the suburbs would suit them fine, better even. She nodded numbly as he told her on their morning bus ride, the bumpiness of the road shaking them against each other and then apart. "And my job?" she asked. "You won't have any need. They've been grossly underpaying here, and the best part is the school systems up there are far superior," he told her, to relieve her of any remaining reservations. The bus dropped them off at the stop, and they forked in opposite directions. Samira took the long way to work, where the path wound through an open field and a children's playground and around the side of her building. There was a version of herself a few steps ahead of her, and she watched as this apparition turned back around and boarded the bus to the metro and then disembarked from the train at the airport. She could see herself board a flight and go home, but when she got there, she found not the clay, three-story home of her childhood, but a house in which she'd never lived, a New England colonial, and inside on the floor sat two young children she presumed must be hers, but she couldn't be sure. She couldn't be sure of any of it. Back on the path, a dull ache pulsed at the nape of her neck. She hurried on, fearing she would be late. For the following 2 weeks, she and Aman packed up the apartment. On her last day in lab, she was treated to a hole-in-the-wall noodle house where everyone sat at a circular table while Sichuan dishes spun on a lazy Susan. Everyone made a concerted effort to get to know her. They asked her the questions to which she quickly realized she had no answers. What does your husband's new job entail? Are you planning on returning to research? It's never a bad idea to go back to school either. Don't forget about us, Claude said, interrupting the interrogation. Stay in touch. I won't be surprised if 5 years from now we hear you're a dog research expert. It was early evening when they left the restaurant, the late July sun on the cusp of disappearing. Claude and Samira boarded the red line, heading in the direction of the lab, though Claude's stop came first. They sat side by side in a two-seater, with Claude tapping his foot against the base of a metal pole. The train screeched through its stops. "Would you really not be surprised?" she said, so softly it seemed to take him a moment to register her voice. She wanted him to say she would always surprise him. She wanted to know she was treasured. And because she had nothing to lose, she let her hand fall against his leg and then flatten against the muscle there, the muscle she imagined had once treaded water far deeper than she'd ever encountered. Slowly, the leg stopped tapping and tensed. Then another hand, much larger than hers, enveloped her own and pushed it firmly aside. "I don't think so," he said, his voice gruff. He stood up as they came to a stop. As the doors opened, she caught his eye. He gave her a small nod and disembarked. From the platform, he didn't look back. Later, Samira wouldn't be able to recall how she remained on the train, how she sat through all the stops until the one that dropped her onto the campus. Her card access was still valid until midnight, and instead of walking in the direction of the bus, she returned to the lab. The kennel area was empty of postdocs, although when she turned the lights on, there were a few minutes' worth of haphazard barking before they quieted down. She examined the clipboard, where she found a new entry scribbled in, "Calamity, asterisk, asterisk." So, the dirty work was ready the night before. She walked the rows of pens and found the corresponding one. Calamity was short-haired and his coat was indistinguishable brown. When Samira sat down in front of his cage, he jumped up and growled. She had no desire to open the door, but she cooed and shh until he calmed down and lay on what appeared to be a section of a foam mattress topper that served as a bed. He kept watch through the corner of his eye. When his eyes finally closed, she brought the back of her hand against the cage, and he opened them again. Slowly, she slid her hand through the bars and patted his forehead awkwardly. Tomorrow they were both headed to places where, supposedly, they could be anything they wanted. They were lucky. Thank you. And up next, please welcome the wonderful Jonathan Bar Heinen.
Hello. I'm going to read off my phone here. Thank you all for being here. The time I share with all of you extraordinary writers and this incredible staff are some of the most rewarding days of my year. Leah, Adam, I see it, you're somewhere here. Travis and Gwen. Gwen can't be here, but she's watching the live stream. Hi, Gwen. Thank you all for having me back. So I'm in the very early stages of this project. It's about a psychic who's been missing for the last 25 years. Her husband, newly sober and long suspected of having had a hand in her disappearance, receives a cryptic message that saves him from a catastrophe and leads him to believe that his wife is alive. His estranged daughter, a washed-up mixed martial artist, reluctantly agrees to accompany him on a road trip from Oklahoma to a spiritualist commune in Central Florida, hoping to find answers to the mystery that has touched upon every facet of her life. So it's like a fraught father-daughter road trip reconciliation mystery, or something like that. And it's set about 10 years in the future amid escalating climate change. It's called Casa Daga. 1, the psychic's daughter. It was Memorial Day, the day her dad would come back into her life, the day the International Space Station would deorbit, miss its intended target in Point Nemo, and crash just a few miles away. But before any of that, Georgina Klee was headed into the living room where her Uncle Ellery was sitting on the couch, struggling to roll a joint, and streaming a decades-old video of her mother titled Psychic Wins Wheel of Fortune. She felt a tremble beneath her feet, then the ground began to quake. It had become common enough, fallout from years of energy exploration and wastewater disposal, but it didn't matter how many times Georgina felt the tremors, the sensations remained terrifying to her. A trio of scented candles on the coffee table clinked, family photos hanging on the wall shivered, the ceiling fan rattled as it spun. She imagined the ground splitting open, the walls crumbling, the roof caving in, and she might have taken what she considered to be reasonable precautions, bracing herself in a doorway or diving beneath the dining room table. But her Uncle Ellery turned to her and said, "For Christ's sake, would you relax?" As soon as he finished speaking, the quake had passed. Georgina made her way into the living room and sat down on the couch beside him. His hands were shaking, fingers gnarled and racked with arthritis from decades of grappling and a career in law enforcement, but he managed to twist up a joint. On the screen, her mother said, "Pat, I'd like to solve. Don't lose any sleep over it." Vanna flipped around the remaining letters and gave her a round of applause. "I miss her now as much as ever," Ellery said, "even after all this time." He lit the joint and took a hit. Then he leaned back, sunk into the couch, and closed his eyes. "You want some of this?" Georgina said sure. She took a couple of puffs and watched her mother spin the wheel and call out letters for the 1,000th time thanks to an enthusiast of hers who'd uploaded it. She and Ellery passed the joint back and forth until her mother entered the bonus round. Pat said, "It's a phrase." Her mother assessed the board, called out 3 more consonants, another vowel. Before Vanna could finish revealing letters, her mother yelled out, "Change of heart." Triumphant music played, and her mother ran across the stage and climbed into the Jeep Wrangler she'd just won. Then the video ended, and another came into queue, algorithmically determined, this one titled Psychic's Daughter, Brutal KO, the Play Now option pre-selected. Georgina reached for the remote and turned off the TV. "Listen," Ellery said, "your dad called me earlier." "Oh yeah?" Georgina took one last puff and sighed out a cloud of smoke. "He's been trying to get a hold of you for a while." Georgina hadn't spoken to her dad in over a year, and it had been even longer since she'd seen him. He had the demeanor of someone who'd blown every opportunity that had come within reach and still felt that he'd unfairly been sent back to the starting line. He'd always struggled with sobriety, but it got worse when her mother went missing, when everyone assumed he'd had something to do with it. After Ellery took custody, her dad wrote letters from rehab, told her that he, George Klee, was a secret agent working on orders from the government, a lie that seemed so obvious and absurd to her even then, as a child. When he got out, he tried to fill a spot in her life, but more often than not, he failed to show up when he said he would and offered bizarre excuses for his absences, claiming he'd been meeting with film producers to develop a reality television series, working with journalists on an expose, or helping the police as a civilian informant, which, given his history, may have actually been true. He lied, he stole, but she didn't believe he'd chosen to be a bad man. He just couldn't help but make bad choices. A few years earlier, he gated out of Crabtree Correctional Center after serving 6 months for grand larceny, and it seemed like he was finally getting his shit together. He was meeting his PO, going to meetings, and passing his piss test, but then he skipped out on his job washing dishes at a steakhouse on Lake Hefner, and the next day he died on the floor beside a slot machine at the Remington Park Horse Track Casino. The EMTs administered Narcan, fit a bag valve onto his face, and pumped artificial breaths. They got his lungs working, his heart beat, and she'd hoped that being brought back to life might be a turning point, but it wasn't. He'd been in and out of clinics and custody ever since, so she broke ties, decided the best way to love him was from a distance. But she couldn't rid herself of the lingering hope that maybe this time would be different. For what it's worth, Ellery told her, he sounded good. Georgina took one last puff and snuffed the joint in the ashtray. "So what, you think I should call him?" "All I'm saying is he sounded good," Ellery told her. "If you want to call him, you should. If you don't have to." He stood up, stretched like a tired bear, and scratched his stomach. Then he announced, "I'm hungry," and shuffled toward the kitchen. The air outside smelled of wood chip smoke and burning charcoal. Georgina made her way across the backyard, past the Jeep Wrangler, in fair shape for as old as it was, though it shotgunned gasoline. She heard music, the splash of somebody doing a belly flop or cannonball, the chatter of their neighbors hosting Memorial Day barbecues. Sorry, there's a bug right here. Come here, buddy. You're good. Okay. Barbecues. Ellery had owned his house, a mid-century 3-bed, 2-bath bungalow in Crown Heights, since before he took custody, but the neighborhood had since been overrun by Californians. The first wave came during COVID when they cashed in on high-value homes and created a leisure class in Oklahoma City, like the Grapes of Wrath in reverse. She had more sympathy for the second wave, climate refugees who'd fled not only drought and wildfire, but the big one. Even so, and however irrationally, she blamed them for the increase in earthquakes here, as though they'd brought those along with them. In the corner of the backyard, there was a small cottage where Georgina lived. Her mother had used it for her work before she went missing. A sign with Psychic Regina written above an open hand with palmistry marks still hung above the door, and mystery fans and internet sleuths occasionally hazarded the fence to capture a picture of it. It was supposed to be temporary, just a place for Georgina to regroup after her fighting career hit the skids, but she was no closer now to the next step than she'd been when she moved there. Her coaches had moved on to new prospects. Her old training partners were cozying up to the matchmakers and advancing the ranks. Besides Ellery, all she had was a missing mother, a figure that had fascinated the nation, fodder for countless investigative programs, podcasts, and Reddit pages that speculated on what had happened, and a dad who she hadn't seen in some time. And even though she wasn't sure she wanted to see him again, she took her phone from her pocket and returned his call. Thank you. Please welcome Shelby Knauss.
Hi. Thank you, Leah. Hi, Brianna. And Adam, and Travis, and Gwen, deeply Gwen, of course. And the staff, who feels as ever like family. And my new friends, who feel somehow like very old friends. I feel really lucky to be here. And very nervous also. Okay, so I'm just gonna read 3 poems, and the first one is very new. I wrote it this week, and so I'm not sure that it can sort of stand on its own yet, and I wanna give a little context. It is in part about returning home to a partner who's attempted suicide, but it is also about my experience having narcolepsy, which for me often results in a really porous relationship with reality. The line between wakefulness and dream can feel quite flimsy. I'll sleepwalk, so my body awake and my mind asleep, or have sleep paralysis, in which my mind is awake and my body is asleep, or have hypnagogic hallucinations, the lines of which are even blurrier. I've been thinking a lot about the ways in which these behaviors or conditions appear in my life when I'm fully cognizant, or how in those in-between states I can sometimes feel safer than when I'm awake and moving through the world. One example of this that I'll mention in the poem is flight anxiety. So often I've died in my dreams, so in a situation where I'm on a plane and have convinced myself that it's going down, I will sort of perform that little trick of telling myself that it's a dream, and that, you know, the other side of death in that situation is simply to wake again. Okay, this is called This Is a Cliff. Sorry. Okay, this is a cliff. This is a cliff. Cicadas crying siren sharp and light bending yellow into the valley, the body standing before it. This is the point of no, this is sleep, no, this is still awake behind the backs of my lids, but barely. I'm a diver. This is my arc into the black pitch, that slow motion fall into water, not water, absence. Not absence, a dream. This is my dream, I once said in a dream to my mother, who was standing, waiting alone at a crosswalk. When I asked why she was there, she said, "What do you mean? I'm dreaming." In my dream, I am trapped in her dream. This is part of the problem. No, the diagnosis. The diagram of neurons firing at the wrong time. This is the sleep study, the second wake-up call. The night nurse saying, "Sorry, honey, we need you on the treadmill now. Need to know what your heart has been doing when you sleep." This is the mile I walk at 3 a.m. with my eyes closed. This is the crosswalk, no, a hospital room. A mess of wires glued to my head and chest. This is the voice over the intercom saying, "That's good, we got what we need." Then back in bed, "Go find sleep now," the way a flight attendant announces, "In case of rough air," before takeoff. This is instruction disguised as a riddle. This is the flight home, a faulty engine. No, this is the cliff, the body before it trapped in my body. The cliff, that body, back home, breathing. The body back home is breathing. There's a trick to this, to dying in the mind or believing as much. Say this is a dream enough and the body begins to believe it. Say the engine is faulty, the end of the fall is a matter of waking. This is the point, no, the risk. To stare at your luggage go by and forget there is somewhere you're going, have gone. No, this is no more than a series of actions. This is the body reaching for a suitcase, the door of a taxi, the key to the house buried deep in a bag for embrace. This is the cliff. The body before it, beside me now, in bed. This is his hand reaching for the lamp. This is a riddle, no, a prayer. This is your flight attendant speaking. I'll see you in the morning. Don't forget to find me in your dreams. Okay. This next one is called I Close My Eyes and Think of Water, which is a line in the James Wright poem Trying to Pray. I close my eyes and think of water. In ways, it was a simpler kind of grief. That first emergence, how it settled in the body, or perhaps more apt, the body it became. That summer, I slung a bag across my back and filled it up each day with stones flat enough to skip. I'll skip the part about the water source. There wasn't any water, just the thought of it enough. But now I wake up with a backache when the top sheet bunches too much underneath my body in my sleep. I thought the yellow paint would make up for the lack of light, but pinched a nerve last week while boxing up the contents of the shelf above my sink and couldn't help but hate the shade I'd chosen. What I'd wanted was to walk outside and have no clue which way would get me to the grocery store quickest. I must have left the back door open by mistake because the stray cat, always feasting on tinned fish left in the alley by my neighbor, walked right in and curled up on my kitchen floor. I tried to shoo her out to no avail. She batted at a roll of packing tape and seemed to know I couldn't if I wanted Ben to lift her. I found a bowl and filled it up with water. The day had slowly spilled out into evening. I closed the door and sat beside her. Okay, this one's a little longer, but it is the last one. Okay, I was really obsessed with the show Roseanne as a kid, the 90s sitcom. It was the first time I'd ever encountered an on-screen representation of a family that reminded me of my own, which is to say, really messy and crass and Midwestern and used humor to cope with conditions of poverty. And so throughout my adulthood, it's something I found myself returning to repeatedly and consuming in the way that one consumes comfort food. When the show first aired, it was also really progressive for its time, but in the years that it followed, Roseanne Barr, show's creator, has become sort of radicalized. She created a reboot in which the show's protagonist is a Trump supporter, and shortly after that aired, she was canceled for a racist comment she made on Twitter. So this poem is about trying to reconcile those two things. And also it's a poem after, it's after a poem called Asante by my high school English teacher who was once a fellow here, named Matt Miller. Okay. Roseanne. Roseanne, I'm writing this tired. As a kid, I once woke in the middle of the night with my chin in my hands, my eyes dry and fixed to the screen were already open. Roseanne, I'd been watching a Roseanne marathon. Roseanne, I was raised on TV. Roseanne, I don't remember having a bedtime. My dad worked nights and my mom would lock herself in her bedroom exhausted. Roseanne, my mom, like you, was the matriarch. Roseanne, my mom was a janitor. She cleaned the church up on Frank Street and would pay me $5 to oil pews and vacuum the cafeteria. Roseanne, post-service coffee should be canceled. The congregation stayed late, stomping sprinkles from the donuts into the fibers of the carpet. Roseanne, I could go on and the rest of my life without seeing another donut. Roseanne, I'm a celebrity too. Was a guest on the Ellen Show as a child inventor. Roseanne, they flew us to LA and we stayed in a hotel where my parents couldn't afford to buy breakfast. Roseanne, my dad walked miles and returned an hour later with a liter of Sunny D and a half dozen glazed donuts. Roseanne, I will never forget it. Roseanne, my mother hates donuts. Roseanne, my mother, like you, cannot fake it. Roseanne, I should note that my father's no saint, but I think we can agree that the show, this poem, is primarily the story of a mother, her sister and daughters. Roseanne, I will never have children. Roseanne, I wrote that line to see how it felt to write it. Roseanne, I live in New York now with my sister like a couple of spinsters. The fires up north have clouded the city in a shade of red. that Roseanne you can only imagine. Roseanne, I was always Darlene. Long curly hair, perpetually grounded, I tortured my sister whose body blossomed before mine. We shared a room with twin beds and a lamp that responded to clapping. Roseanne, I'll let you imagine the rest. Roseanne, I once pushed her so far she pulled back her arm, threw a fist at my jaw, and I fell to the floor of our hallway. Roseanne, our parents said I probably had it coming. Roseanne, I can assure you, I had it coming. Roseanne, my sister was more of a Becky, kinder, responsible. When we'd wrestle with our dad and he'd jokingly ask if we were tough or taffy, my sister would always choose taffy. Roseanne, I've got a bone to pick with Becky, devoting her life to a deadbeat boyfriend. I feel certain she'd have made it through college. Roseanne, my sister was the first in our family to make it through college. Before that, boarding school. Roseanne, I went too, and my parents went deeper into debt. Roseanne, I nearly failed out and only got A's in English. Once I was walking to class and crossed paths with my sister's boyfriend. Roseanne, he pretended to go in for a hug and proceeded instead to unclasp my bra through the back of my shirt. Roseanne, she dumped him her first year of college. Around the same time, the girls in my hallway gathered in the common room at 4 a.m. and did crunches while they streamed the royal wedding. Roseanne, I watched you in secret when I should have been doing my homework. Roseanne, I sometimes dream I'm sitting at the desk in the third-floor room where I often imagined my body swinging from a rope in the stairwell. Roseanne, in the dream, it's the end of the term and I've never once made it to math class. Roseanne, I made it through school. Roseanne, my parents couldn't have afforded to ship back my body. Roseanne, I'm medicated now. I watched you in secret when I should have been doing my homework. Roseanne, I didn't miss home but missed relating to something like it. Roseanne, you were greedy for wanting a reboot. Roseanne, the reboot contradicted the end of the series as you left it. Roseanne, Darlene would have stayed in Chicago. Roseanne would have called it a cop-out. You might have imagined Lanford, but I swear it's the town I grew up in. Roseanne, I see now my faith was flawed. Roseanne, yesterday your president was indicted. Roseanne, maybe that was never the way it was going to end. Roseanne, you got something right that last season. The way that Roseanne, in a state of desperation, reimagined a life in which her husband lived and they went on to win the lottery. Roseanne, I understand Roseanne had to write her way into another reality. Roseanne, I understand the power of fiction. But Roseanne, I'm still waiting for the punchline. The last time I was home, I woke up to a piece of cat shit left at the foot of my bed, and the toilet only worked if you turn the water on and then off again. Roseanne, please just tell me the punchline. Roseanne, my family has a Powerball pool. $10 a pop, and we each get to choose a number. Always 36, for the number of times you salted your food beside your fictional husband's hospital bed. Roseanne, is that the punchline? Thank you.